Genetically modified organisms, or GMOs, stir controversy wherever they're found, be it in farmers' fields or on supermarket shelves. Scientists overwhelmingly say they're safe, but the public remains skeptical. Joining us now to consider whether we have the facts we need on GMOs, in Nanaimo, British Columbia via Skype, Robert Wager, lab demonstrator at Vancouver Island University, where he teaches biochemistry, and here in studio, Steven Druker, author of Altered Genes, Twisted Truth, How the Venture to Genetically Engineer Our Food Has Subverted Science, Corrupted Government, and Systematically Deceived the Public. You're not really on the fence with that title, are you?
No.
I think we know where you're coming from on this. Robert in British Columbia, good to have you on the program. Stephen, nice to have you up from Iowa, USA.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for making the trip. Robert, let me start with you. There's a Pew study that found last year that 88% of scientists believe GMOs are safe, but then you go survey the public and they say only 37% of the public agrees. What's the discrepancy about there?
Well, unfortunately, it's a complex science that the public is not trained in, and so they have a difficult time distinguishing between what the scientists know to be accurate science and the prolific, what I term as pseudoscience, that generates scare feelings within the public.
Stephen, I would ask you why you disagree with what 88% of scientists are saying.
Well, first, it's not 88% of scientists. That study was only conducted among members of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, so no scientists in any other country were polled. Secondly, those scientists comprise scientists across the board. Most of them are not biologists, and certainly a very small percentage would have been molecular biologists that actually understand what genetic engineering is and understand the risks.
So if you're going to survey the molecular biologists who are truly expert in the field, what do you think the split would be? It
certainly wouldn't be 88%, I don't think. Certainly, if you actually get an honest opinion, the experts at the FDA, the FDA's own biotechnology task force, studied this issue thoroughly and overwhelmingly concluded that genetic engineering is very different than traditional breeding, that it entails different risks, and that every one of its foods has to be rigorously tested. Also, the expert panel that produced the Royal Society of Canada's major report on genetically engineered foods also concluded that genetically engineered foods entail unique risks, that they have to be rigorously tested, and that the way that Health Canada and the EU and other regulators were testing them was fatally flawed.
All right, let me go to Robert on that.
Unjustified.
Let me go to Robert on that. Robert, is there new and unique forms of risks associated with GMOs that you're not aware of?
No. I think it's fair to say that in the early days of this type of technology, and this is what Stephen is referring to, prior to any commercial release of GM crops, there were questions. But we've now had 25 years of research, and it's very clear that every National Academy of Science, every health authority, and every food safety authority all agree on the safety of this type of plant breeding.
Well, that's very interesting. He said every National Academy of Science. As far as I understand, the Royal Society of Canada is this country's National Academy of Science, and it flat out does not agree with that statement. Its report was released in 2001. It has never been retracted. It has never been refuted. The other studies that have come out have ignored it because they haven't tried to refute it. And in fact, the National Academy of Science in the United States released a report in 2004, which when you actually look at it, not only did they ignore what the Royal Society said, they ignored quite a bit of the evidence that the Royal Society cited.
All right, let's get Robert on that. Robert, do you want to come back on that?
Sure. The National Academy of Science in the U.S. says explicitly there is no evidence of unique hazards existing either in the use of rDNA, recombinant DNA technology, or in the movement of genes between species. That's their exact quote. It's the same quote they said in 1987, the same quote they've said in 2 white papers since.
Yeah,
so unfortunately,
hang on.
Sorry.
Yeah, could I just, Robert, let me just ask you, do you have any evidence that GMOs are dangerous to eat?
No.
So it's safe and you would?
Absolutely.
Stephen?
Well, there's abundant evidence that several different genetically engineered foods have created harm to laboratory animals. That's in peer-reviewed research. A review of the scientific literature in 2011 that reviewed all of the published literature found that half of the studies indicated problems. So that clearly is it's there in the literature.
Right,
I want to get back to the National Academy of Science. Robert stated a 1987 study. That had nothing to do with food safety. That was only on environmental effects of field testing. Plus, as my book demonstrates, one of the scientists who was on that panel and produced it, when he was challenged about scientific irregularities in that report by a scientist, said to him, you know, we can't discuss this on a scientific basis. This is a political issue. Okay. It was a political document. It wasn't even a scientific report.
Robert, do you want to respond to that?
As I said, the National Academy of Science in the U.S., as well as probably the most recent national or international body of academics, the European Academy of Science Advisory Council, put out a report in 2013, and they explicitly said that there is no validated evidence of harm, and that's very recent, and that we should definitely include this technology if we're going to move forward in sustainable agriculture.
So let me follow up with Steven on this. We have been eating genetically modified organisms in our food for quite some time now, right? How many years would you say?
The first crops came out in a big way in 1996.
Okay, so it's 20 years already. Do you have any evidence that people have been harmed by eating these foods?
Well, we know that the very first ingestible product of genetic engineering, which was a food supplement produced through it, caused a major epidemic in the United States, killed dozens of people, seriously sickened between 4,000 and 5,000.
Because of GMOs?
Yes. Well, it was produced through genetically engineered bacteria, and the evidence as a whole points very strongly toward the genetic engineering as the cause of the unusual toxic contamination that caused that epidemic.
When did that happen?
1989 and 1990.
Okay, well, so that's a quarter century ago. Are we no better 25 years later?
Well, but the whole point is that we only know that that supplement was problematic because it caused unique disease. If it had actually just increased the cancer rate or increased colitis rate, we still wouldn't even know that that supplement was harmful. It would still be out creating harm. Now, there have not been any human tests, clinical tests on these foods. There have been many laboratory, well-conducted tests with laboratory animals that have detected statistically significant harm. That's in the scientific literature, and that cannot be denied. Also, Robert's been dancing around the fact that the Royal Society of Canada came out very strongly criticizing the regulatory regime that was in place then. Health Canada still has the same lax
let me
policies.
ask him, okay, I got to keep the time even here, okay, Steven? So, Robert, if you want to put your tap shoes back on or take them off or do whatever to respond to that, be my guest.
First of all, if we want to talk about the Royal Society, as I said, it was in 2001. That's 14 years ago. And early on, this was early on in the development of this technology, they said that the methods used to test foods were not rigorous enough. But in 2003, the United Nations, OECD, and WHO generated international standards for how these foods are tested. And every country that monitors them, except for a few that are just beginning to develop these procedures, they all use these standards. So to suggest that these foods are not tested properly, when in fact a global standard is used around the world, really is misleading.
Well, that's very interesting, Robert. The United States, perhaps you're not aware that the United States of America, which was the first country to basically commercialize these foods, is the biggest grower and the biggest consumer of these foods, has no standards at all. The U.S. food, would you be quiet a moment and let me finish? Okay. I'm a lawyer, I understand the system. The United States Food and Drug Administration does not require one iota of testing. They've even admitted that in federal court in our country. They have no requirement whatsoever for any testing of genetically engineered foods. Monsanto and DuPont don't even have to inform the FDA if they're going to put a GMO on our market.
Can I just see if we agree on the facts here? Robert, do you agree on those facts?
Not at all. Again, it's very misleading. It's very simply put, there's been about 138 GM crops that have been commercialized. 138 of them went through the FDA evaluation process, which is based on the OECD testing. Every single one. He is correct that it is voluntary, but every single GM crop that has ever come to market has gone through that process.
That's not true.
That is true. Give me one. Give me one that has not gone through that.
I can tell you that the head of the FDA's Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition just last October 21st, in her testimony before the U.S. Senate Agriculture Committee, admitted that there were a significant percentage of foods that haven't even gone through that process. Secondly, secondly, the FDA's own biotechnology strategic coordinator has admitted that that process is not a review process at all. The FDA does not even ask for or receive original data. You can't have a scientific review if you don't get the original data. It's a rubber stamp. It was set up, and the FDA, there are memos from the FDA files that a lawsuit I organized divulged that showed that the FDA actually, in planned that voluntary process just so it would not give the impression they had given the industry self-regulation.
All right, let's get Robert
but
to
they
comment.
have given the industry
Let's let Robert
self-regulation.
respond, please.
My turn?
Yep, please.
Did you not lose that lawsuit?
Excuse me.
Yes. My turn. My
the
turn now.
lawsuit. Excuse me. That fact has nothing to do with the outcome of the lawsuit, Robert. The biotechnology strategic manager has admitted in writing that review process is not a scientific review, and the FDA has admitted it on at least one other occasion too. That is a fact.
I see. So all the tests which are done according to OECD testing protocols used around the world, in Canada, in Europe, in Japan, in Australia, in the United States, they're all done on every single GM crop. But you say they are not happening. That's very interesting.
I'm saying the FDA doesn't require them, and they don't.
Sorry, let's let Robert finish his point.
It is a voluntary process in the U.S. at this point in time, but every single GM crop that has come to market has gone through that process. So yes, you could argue that perhaps we should make it mandatory. I don't think it would matter a stitch because every single one has gone through it.
Stephen, let me just understand this.
Yeah.
If in your view, the foods that have been genetically modified are not safe to eat, why have they been approved for sale in the United States and Canada?
Well, the United States has presumed they're all safe without any testing. So the United States doesn't require a stitch of testing. They presumed in 1992, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, against the recommendations of their own scientists, and on the basis of zero data, that genetically engineered foods would be presumed safe. That was years before the first was even commercialized and before the first safety testing had even been done.
Robert, can I get your view on why you think these products are available for market if they have in fact not been proven to be 100% safe?
Well, there's no such thing as 100% safe. What you can have is relative safety. In 15 years, about 20 years now of GM crops on the market, there is not a single documented case of harm from consuming ingredients that were derived from GM crops. Not one anywhere in the world.
Do we agree on those facts?
Well, if you're talking about human beings, but if you're talking about the laboratory animals, we have many documented cases of harm. Also, I want to mention his statement that, well, we haven't got any documented cases of human harm is not a scientific statement. And the fact that somebody is purporting that that's a scientific statement shows how really unscientific the proponents are. Because the same claim could have been made about cigarettes in 1960. Hey, trillions and trillions of cigarettes have been smoked for hundreds of years, and there's no documented cases of harm.
Are you saying there's a corollary between cigarette smoking and GMO?
No, what I'm saying is the same argument could have been made because the epidemiological studies that were done on tobacco weren't at the stage in 1960 where we knew that there was causality.
Okay, understood.
Now, the difference is there haven't been any epidemiological studies even begun on genetically engineered foods, and there couldn't be. Because at least in the case of tobacco, we knew who was smoking, they knew when they started, they knew how many cigarettes a day, so the studies could be done. In the case of GMOs, epidemiologists have said it would be well nigh impossible even to do epidemiological studies.
Let me follow up on this. I think you allege that in your country, the Food and Drug Administration, and in our country, Health Canada, are essentially lying to the public about the sales of GMOs. Have I got that accurate?
Well, the FDA has definitely been lying to the U.S. Health Canada, I'm not sure about the extent to which we could say they are lying.
Why is the FDA lying about this in your view?
Well, it's very clear. The FDA has admitted in writing they have an agenda to foster biotechnology, and it's very clear that going back to 1986 in the administration of President Ronald Reagan, a decision was made to promote the U.S. biotechnology industry and to speed the introduction of its products onto domestic and foreign markets.
And you think the FDA is in cahoots with that still?
Well, the FDA was given a directive by Reagan White House.
Okay, but that's 30 years ago.
Well, but every successive administration has continued to promote genetically engineered
All right,
foods.
let me get Robert on that. Robert, have you in your travels seen any evidence to suggest that either Health Canada or the FDA are in cahoots with industry to, in essence, pull the wool over our eyes and make us sense that this is actually healthier than it is for us?
No, not at all. It's interesting that, as I stated, in 20 years of commercial products and trillions of meals, there is no evidence of harm. So now, of course, the critics have a tendency to go to conspiracy theories that somehow national academies of science, health authorities, food safety authorities are all in cahoots with the biotech industry. If you look at the portfolios, which are available on the deregulation, which is the technical term for GM crops, they outline very detailed testing that goes involved in all of these things. So
can I just understand that a little more, Robert? When Health Canada approves a product that has been GMO'd, if I can use that
yes.
participle, what's the process by which it makes that determination?
Well, there's a great deal of testing, both for food safety issues and environmental release issues. Both of those have to be explored in great detail, as I said, according to OECD standards. And if any questions come up, then more testing is done. It usually takes between 8 and 10 years of testing to get any GE crop commercialized. And it costs tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. And the company that wants to commercialize it has to pay for all that testing.
Stephen, you want to respond?
Well, first, again, it's very important to understand that the experts at Royal Society of Canada and the experts at the FDA and hundreds of other independent scientists who understand genetic engineering have emphasized that the only kind of testing that could come close to determining such a food is safe has to involve toxicological feeding studies with the whole foods. But in 2001, the Royal Society rapped Health Canada and the EU and other regulators for not requiring such studies. Such studies were not even required by the EU until 2013. So I don't know where he's getting all of his information about this rigorous testing.
Let me try this follow-up. Shouldn't at some point over the past 30 years if these things were as dangerous as you say they are, should we not have at least, a half a dozen or a dozen serious health cases come to our attention?
Since genetically engineered crops were put on the market, we've had increases in many diseases. That's correlation, it's not causation. Again, as I've been explaining, epidemiological studies that could actually link problems with the GMO haven't been done, and they couldn't be done.
Why don't they do them?
Because they couldn't be done. That's what I'm saying. They couldn't be done. Tobacco was a case in which it could have been done. That's why there has to be rigorous pre-market safety testing and demonstration of safety. Also, Steve, you said that I say are so dangerous. It's not me. I'm reporting on what the FDA scientists said. I'm reporting about what the Royal Society said. I'm reporting about what hundreds of eminent scientists have said. There is not an overwhelming consensus within the scientific community that understands genetic engineering that these foods are safe, and there are hundreds of experts that have issued warnings. There has never been a consensus within the expert community about the safety of genetically engineered foods.
Let's pick up on that last point. Robert, would you agree that there is no consensus out there right now on the safety of GMOs in the expert community?
There's no consensus except for every National Academy of Science, every National Food Safety Authority, every health authority. And I could list 30, 40 different scientific organizations, different aspects of biology that have also given their endorsement. So Stephen is not correct. And I find it interesting that he keeps going back to 2001 when in fact we have 15 years of research after that point. I asked him one question: what test not already done would he like to see added to the evaluation of GE crops, and why?
Well, first, every crop should have been subjected to rigorous long-term safety studies using the whole food. And
Okay, can I ask you, how long is that?
Only a
How long is
smidgen
that?
of those. What?
How long would you like? What's long term
should
for
be
you?
at least 2 years, and then multi-generational studies. Several scientists have called for that, and there are very, very few GMOs that have ever been subjected to such tests.
Okay, if I gave you a review paper that looked at 25 multi-generational or long-term studies far beyond the 90-day trials, which in fact the European Food Safety Authority recommends as a standard, I could give you, there's lots and lots of it out there. You just choose to ignore it.
No, are those foods that are actually on the market consumed? I'd like to present some very interesting information. You know, of foods that actually did pass testing, that of the small minority that really did go through testing with the whole food, and this was at least for 90 days, which is intermediate, not even long term, when a team of independent scientists in Europe, university scientists, got a hold of the data that had been submitted to the regulators and on which the regulators in the EU had approved those foods for human consumption, they found that, and those were 19 studies comprising soy and corn varieties, comprising 83% of the genetically engineered foods that people have actually been regularly eating. They find that 9% of the measured parameters, including blood and urine biochemistry and organ weights, were significantly disrupted in the animals that ate the genetically engineered food.
What kind of
Moreover, the greatest disturbances, the greatest disturbances were to the kidneys of the males and the livers of the females, and those are the major reactive organs in cases of chronic food toxicity.
We're running out of time here.
They were published in a peer-reviewed journal in 2011.
What kind of animals?
He's quoting Seralini.
Those were the rats.
Those were rats. Okay.
Yeah.
Robert?
He's quoting Seralini.
Seralini and several other scientists.
Oh, come on. Seralini's been debunked by...
Scientist,
Hang on, I need to hear one at a time. Excuse me. I need to hear one at a time. Robert, please finish your point.
His Seralini 2011 paper was retracted.
It wasn't. Not that paper.
Oh, right. The guy republished it in a paper-published journal, and it is complete junk. If you look at Figure 1, just look at, it's now Figure 6 in the republished after being retracted. If you look at that, the control rats in his study died at 30%, whereas the rats fed the highest level of GM crops died at 10%.
Robert, you're not talking about the study that I was citing.
Which one are you talking about?
I just said, you didn't hear me.
Seralini, 2011.
Seralini has published several studies, Robert.
Oh, yes,
this was one. Would you please let me be quiet a moment?
Gentlemen.
This was a study conducted by Seralini and several different scientists. It reviewed the data packages that have been submitted to the European Union researchers and researchers in other parts of the world. And it found, using that data, that statistically significant differences existed that were there. And the most troubling were to the livers and the kidneys. Those are the major.
Let's let him
study
respond.
was published in a peer-reviewed journal. It has never been retracted. You're mixed up about what studies you're talking about.
Okay, let's let Robert respond, please.
Thank you. Seralini is a very well-known anti-GMO person. He's paid millions of euros a year to come up with this stuff by people who have their agenda to tell me I'm wrong. Tell me that Seralini is not paid millions of euros a year by an anti-GMO foundation.
I have no knowledge about that.
Oh, okay,
but even
fine.
if he isn't,
May I finish? May I finish? May I finish?
Yes, please.
Okay, the European Food Safety Authority has looked at each and every one of Seralini's papers, and every one of them has been completely debunked as bad science. Now you are a lawyer. How do you evaluate that without having the training in molecular biology and biochemistry?
Excuse me, but that study is has been reviewed by many independent scientists who say it's strong. It was peer-reviewed and published. You know,
Okay,
any,
I'll
excuse me,
give
any
you this then.
scientists who, and it's documented in my book, almost every scientist who has performed research that has detected statistically significant harm in laboratory animals fed GMOs gets viciously attacked by people like you and unjustly attacked. And my book documents how unjust the attacks are.
Let me come in at this late hour because we're almost running out of time. You have both advanced points to support each of your sides of the argument. You two are far more expert in this than the people who are watching this program right now. So I want you to give some advice. Robert, go first, please. How are we supposed to make up our minds on this issue?
I would suggest you go to National Academies of Science, National Health Authorities, and National Food Safety Authorities. They have lots of information on their websites. See what they have to say. Stephen, how do we figure out who's right here?
Well, we look at the independent scientists. We look at good scientists like Michael Antonio, with the a geneticist with the University of London, who, by the way, has a doctorate. He's better credentialed than Robert happens to be. And he studied all of these studies very thoroughly. He uses recombinant DNA technology in his own work in trying to cure human genetic disease. So he's not anti-genetic engineering, but he is anti-using it in agriculture the way it has been done. And let me read a quote from Dr. Michael Antonio. What repeatedly happens in the case of GE food is that despite increasing evidence of serious adverse health test results, government and industry continue unabated with the development, endorsement, and marketing of these foods as if nothing has happened, to the point they even seem to ignore the results of their own research. There is clearly a pressing need for independent research in the potential ill effects of GE food, and this research must include extensive animal and human feeding trials.
Robert, I gave you the first word. Stephen, I'm giving you the last word. That's our time for our debate. I thank both of you for coming into TVO tonight and helping us out with this. Steven Druker, author of Altered Genes, Twisted Truth, and Robert Wager, lab demonstrator at Vancouver Island University. My thanks to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.